Hello, friends. Today I want to talk about the different phases of life and being a creative. Now, this is based on the idea of being a working creative, like making it your living, because that's not only the experience that I've had, and I have a lot of friends that have been professional writers since they were younger. So that's just what I have the most experience with. And I also think that, like, if we're going to break it down into a video that simplifies things a lot, that's really the only way to do it. Because, of course, if you start later in life or you're not treating it professionally, of course, you're going to have like chaos phases. But if you start in your 20s, I have noticed there's certain patterns. And some of this, I'm sure, transfers over to everyone, even if you're not making your living as a creative or you don't get started until later in life. But just as a caveat, there's obviously no one way to say, like, this is what happens in your 20s, this is what happens in your 30s. Everyone's going to have a different life experience. But for the purposes of this video, I started in young adult publishing in the 2000s. So that is one particular reason that I have a lot of friends that started out in their 20s, because there were a lot of 20-somethings publishing young adult novels in the 2000s, and young adult was booming. And it makes sense that a lot of younger people would be writing it. So that's where I get a lot of my information that I will be drawing on to make this video. Of course, there's also a lot of external factors that can influence things: your family, your health, your finances, blah-de-blah. Another thing that I drew from to make this video is just all the many biographies and letters and things I've read from famous authors over the years. So let's get into it. So we start with your childhood, the teenage years. This is a time for dabbling in stuff and art as play. There are no expectations yet. You're probably going to start finding some of your initial themes and inspirations. You're kids. When you're young, you're very sponge-like. The things that you love when you're a kid stay with you forever and tend to have the biggest influence on your work in later years. There are certainly things that I discovered later in life that had a pretty good influence on me, but nothing compares to the stories that I loved when I was a kid. It just ingrains itself in your consciousness forever, whether you like it or not. Since you're a kid or a teen, you probably don't have a lot of like professionals in your life, unless you happen to come from a professional family with writers or artists or whatever. So you might share with friends, but you're not really getting like serious feedback. It's all about just playing around, soaking in stuff you like, developing your voice and your themes, and you might make some of your early pokes at professional ambitions. When I was like 10, 12, I got out a copy of Writer's Market from the library, which was a big, thick book that listed all the like publishers that you could submit to and the guidelines for how to submit to them. And I finished this novel. It was not very long. It was really more like a very long short story maybe, but it felt huge to me as a kid. And I read like the formatting guidelines for submission, but I couldn't figure out how to do that on our computer. So I just started handwriting it, like double spaced with the manuscript name and page numbers and stuff at the top. And that was very tedious. So I only made it to like page 5. And I also started to think, this is really bad. And I didn't do anything with it. But there are those early moments, like almost delusional moments as a kid where you're like, maybe. I'm sure that with social media, that's even more intense, because now you literally can like get a global audience as a child, which is honestly terrifying. I don't even want to think about what I might have done if we'd had social media when I was a teenager. When you hit your 20s, and this is true for anybody really, no matter what you're trying to do, the 20s are such a difficult decade because there's this intense pressure to find out where you fit in the world and deliver on it. And it feels like the decisions that you make in your 20s are going to determine the entire rest of your life, which is not true, but it is an important decade. Like, it certainly helps if you can figure out what you want to do, improve yourself in your 20s. It's harder to get started later, but it does happen all the time. So, like, you're not stuck. And chances are all the adults around you are constantly asking you questions about what you're up to. And they're all worried about you. They want to know, like, are you making it? Are you doing okay? Are you going to be okay? Are you going to be able to move out of the house? Are you going to get a good education? Are you going to find a job? It still feels like you're a little bit of a kid because, like, everybody wants to know what you're up to. And in a lot of cases, you're still dependent on adults in your life in some way or the other. So it kind of feels like they have a right to poke at you, but it's very stressful. But sometimes even worse than what adults around you, older adults, I should say, because you are an adult as well. But even worse sometimes than the adults in your life is the internal pressure to do this thing that you've been dreaming of since you were a kid, maybe. Or maybe it's a newer ambition, but it feels like I have to find my path here. And if your path is creative, it's very scary because you know that is a difficult path and people are constantly questioning it around you. Are you sure about this? Are you going to be okay? This isn't a good career path. It's not very stable. And there's also that decision-making process of how are you going to allot your time and resources? This is a heavy decision you never had to make before because as a kid, other people were making most of those decisions for you. But the older you get, the more you have to decide, how am I going to make time for this creative thing? Am I going to put any of my financial resources into like getting a degree for it or any kind of training? Or am I going, if you're doing indie publishing, am I going to invest in like covers and editing and stuff like that? Like you have to start making those decisions. How big are you going to go with this thing? So as a result, any setbacks or defeats that you suffer in your 20s can feel completely soul-crushing and terrifying, like on an existential level. But at the same time, if you want to make it, you're probably at some point going to have to get over that fear of setbacks and failures and start putting yourself out there because it's the only way to really learn and grow and improve and get to where you want to be. But it's also so scary. The stakes feel very high, and it feels like this time where you're going to learn if the world really accepts your ambitions or not. If you like it, to me, it felt like kind of like some kind of dystopian novel where you're gonna like go to be one of the chosen, like you're going to the Sorting Hat or something. Like as a kid, I wanted to be a writer. I dreamed of being a writer. I kind of assumed that I would be a writer in a lot of ways. But when I got to my 20s, it was suddenly like, this is real. And I'm going to find out if I was having delusions about this the whole time. If people are actually going to really like what I do, or if I'm just going to get rejections. The stuff I do is just not working. So the stakes are very scary in your 20s. And one of the most important things I think you can develop as a creative person in your 20s is resiliency and the ability to fail, to put yourself out there and know it's not always going to work out. In fact, sometimes you're going to get an absolutely stinging, brutal rejection that will haunt you for weeks, but you have to do it if this is what you really want to do. Your 30s is a decade for more of the maturing of your craft and your ambitions. My 20s was just about getting a foot in the door. And I also thought in my 20s that once I did get my foot in the door, it would be smooth sailing from there. By the time I reached my 30s, I was considerably more jaded about that idea. I knew that getting my foot in the door was no guarantee that I would stay in the door. But at the same time, I had started to grow a little more accepting of the failure cycles. It was still scary and upsetting if I had a real setback or a failure, but I also knew like that happens and you just need to pivot and have backup plans and stuff like that. My writing also matured considerably in my 30s. I feel like my 30s was the decade where I really started to lock on like my voice. Whereas in my 20s, it was more about how can I write a book that will sell. My 30s was more about how can I become like a career writer, find a voice that is truly mine. And it took writing a lot to get there, to get to a point where writing just didn't feel so hard anymore. Whatever troubles I would come across in the stuff I was working on, I had this confidence that like, I'll figure out a way to fix it. I'll get this book done. Nowadays, when I start something, I know I'm going to get it done. I know I'm going to figure out how to finish it. Whereas in my 20s, a lot of times it was like, oh, I don't know if this project is even going to work. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it, or if I do, it might be just a complete disaster. I might not even like it by the time I'm halfway through. In my 30s, I developed a lot more confidence about like being able to figure out what was wrong with the book and fix it. This is not true for everyone though. And I still have friends that will like start a lot of things and be like, nah, that ain't it. So that's not universal, but either way, I think in your 30s, you experience a lot more maturity in your work and start to get the sense of like, yes, this is me, this is my process, this is how I do things, and this is the kind of work I produce. And even if you're writing to market or writing work for hire, or, you know, kind of working for other people to a certain degree, there starts to be that core sense of self that sustains you. For me, my 30s was also like the hustle and grind decade. When I started off my 30s, I was in a very bad place financially, like the worst place I'd ever been in financially. So I was really hustling to try to get out of that hole. By the end of my 30s, I was having the best success of my life. So I was hustling and grinding to like hang on to that as long as possible. Whether you're doing poorly or doing well, the 30s is like a time when you can really go for it. Like you're less likely to have like health problems and less likely to have burnout, although you can have burnout at any age. But now if you had kids, you almost certainly have kids at home in your 30s. Whether you had them early or you had them late, at some point in your 30s, you probably have kids. So that throws a whole extra thing to juggle into the situation, which I didn't have kids, but many of my friends did. And if anything's going to stop that hustle and grind, it's probably the kids. But whether you have kids or not, chances are you are like running yourself into the ground in your 30s. Now I'm halfway through my 40s, and I have noticed, not just for me, but for a lot of people I know, the 40s often tend to become the burnout years. I am still working very hard. I still feel like I'm working too hard in a lot of ways, but there is definitely this huge burnout factor that wasn't there in my 30s. It just feels sometimes like I have to put aside things that I don't like as much. That's really what it comes down to. I'm still working hard, but I'm not working as like financially minded anymore. Even if I'm still a little worried about money, I have to put more of my resources into things I enjoy more. And there are some other aspects of life that I'm just completely burned out on. Like I just feel like I cannot make myself do it. I know that I am really, really struggling with house cleaning right now and socializing, like maintaining a community. Like I just want to be a hermit. It feels like I just don't have the time and money to have a community right now. Like it's not there. I don't have a lot of money to go out with friends, and I don't want to clean my house to let people come over. So where does that leave me? It makes me feel like I just can't even see anybody anymore. And I also feel like I need more downtime, like reading time, video gaming time, like that really quiet decompression time. So that's another thing that I've just been struggling with, some of the harder work aspects and even just social stuff, house cleaning, because I'm like, I really need that time to just like read. Like I need it so badly. And a lot of my friends seem like they're going through some variation of that as well, that the 40s, like, if you really worked hard in your 20s and 30s, which so many of us do, the 40s is when it just feels like, I can't keep going at this pace anymore. And if you didn't really find success in your 20s and 30s, you might be experiencing a variation of this where you start to feel like, if this is going to be a thing for me, I've got to get it going now. And that's not That's not true, but it does feel like there's a reason that the 40s is kind of that midlife crisis era, because yeah, you do still hopefully have several decades of like life and good health ahead of you, but you can definitely feel it starting to shrink down. You can look back at everything you've accomplished in your previous 40 years and think, okay, I probably only have that again. Like, I'm starting to run out of the big chunk of time, especially if you have like a lot of ambitions. So you know what? That can be pretty freaky to realize. Even for me, like, I've done a lot, but hitting my 40s, it did have that freak out quality of like, even though I've written a lot of books and I've had a lot of success, I haven't really done the thing I really want to do. And if I want to do it, I've got to find a way to do it now. So that's another reason for my burnout, is that sense of like, I have the story of this big story and I really want to tell it. And I don't care anymore if nobody else wants the story. I just have to tell it. Please let me tell it before I die. I will do anything to be allowed to tell the story before I die. But the 40s often still has a lot of external stressors as well. A lot of us in our 40s are caught in the sandwich generation situation with the kids and or aging parents at once. And I've never been more grateful than in my 40s that my parents had me at a pretty young age, because they're still in very good health. They're still only in their 60s. And I'm so glad I don't have to worry about them yet. But nevertheless, that situation comes for us all sooner or later. And for a lot of my friends, it has started to hit in the 40s. But the good thing about your 40s is that you might be starting to really just hit it with like who you are as a creative. Like, you might not have as much time or as much energy as you want to create what you want to do, but you might find that what you're doing just feels like it's really just hitting deep. Or, you know, you can interpret deep however you want. It could be hitting goofy. It doesn't necessarily have to be like deep in a heavy hitting kind of way. It could actually be something extremely lighthearted, but it's like whatever is the most you might be starting to really tap into the core of your being with your art in a way that you might not have been in earlier decades. Now, I'm not in my 50s yet, so this is not based on personal experience. This is just based on friends and biographies and stuff. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. This is me talking out of my ass to a certain extent. But it seems to me that the 50s kind of becomes the get your shit together decade. At this point, your self is well developed. So maybe on an artistic level, you're on a bit of cruise control. You found who you are, and now is just the time to like really do the thing. Or if you have not really hit that core of yourself yet, this is like the decade to figure that out. For some of my friends, this decade ended up being like some kind of big life shift, like getting a divorce, making a huge move. But that can also lead to really fulfilling your purpose in life. If you haven't really done the thing that you really dreamed of doing yet, by the time you get to your 50s, you might hit this certain wall of like resignation and depression that you haven't gotten to do it yet. But just like when you were younger and you first had to come up against really big failures in your 20s and it hit so hard, and you might have started to succeed when you finally got past that terror of failure. I think there's also something about like that later life sense of like, I didn't do the things I wanted to do. I didn't make it. The depression and resignation of that, if you can manage to pick yourself up from that, then it's kind of like, well, who cares now? I've already gotten this far. I haven't gotten to do what I want to do. I might as well create the work I really want to do and just like screw it to the world. And sometimes in that liberation comes great work. If you have done the thing that you really wanted to do, then you might be experiencing kind of a different kind of grief, and that you've had this level of success now, but like it's often just this time of like evolving into this new older self where you know who you are, and now it's either time to do the thing you always wanted to do, or if you already have done the thing you always wanted to do, now you have like the freedom to come up with a new thing. And we've got, you know, your 60s and 70s when you're starting to reach older age. And looking at the creative people around me, this often seems like kind of a great time. There's a certain liberation that comes in being able to maybe retire, or at least maybe work more part-time to get Social Security and Medicare, at least if you're in the States, or to get whatever your country offers you. Have a certain amount of basically universal basic income to do creative stuff. And I know a lot of women who are very creative and fruitful in their 60s and 70s. If you want to see retired women just crushing it creatively, Asheville is definitely a city for that. But that also begs the question, what is this going to look like for millennials, Gen Zers? I don't really know what it's going to look like by the time I get to that age. Am I going to get as much or any Social Security? What is the healthcare system going to look like? What is the climate going to look like? What is anything going to look like in another 20 years? It's I don't know. It could work out. It could be apocalyptic. I don't know. I think it's safe to say that having some manner of steady income coming in all the time and knowing that you have health insurance at any age, whether that's due to a partner or an inheritance or Social Security or good luck with money early on, the more you have financial stability, the more able you are to really be creative and take some risks. That's the reason that throughout my whole life, my only goal, my entire life has been to gain as much financial freedom as possible, because it does make a massive difference to have any level of financial security. Your decisions look different when you have a year of savings in the bank, or a paid off house, or just anything that gives you lower bills and more financial security. You have more ability to experiment and pivot. So for people who are older currently, it still really varies because you cannot live on Social Security in most cases. But for a lot of people, it's giving them more of a level of creative freedom than they might have had at a younger age when they were working. So I don't know what that's going to look like for my age group. Disheveled editing Lydia here. I just want to note, when I say that older people, aka boomers, are more likely to have some retirement money, I am not saying that all boomers are rich jerks. Every time I mention this, somebody gets sensitive about it. I know it's like the hot internet argument right now to hate on boomers and blame them for everything, but that is not me, guys. I don't blame entire age groups for stuff. I am really just trying to state basic facts that generally people 65 and older have a higher proportion of people who can be retired. I'm not saying that none of them have to work, that none of them worked very hard and were denied enough money to retire. Social Security is not a lot of money, goodness knows. Just that there are more older people who are able to pursue their artistic goals later in life when they have more free time. I'm not trying to start generational warfare here, okay? I feel like a lot of the older creative people that I know really approach their artistic things with a more playful mindset. It's kind of like a reversion to childhood. If you kind of know you're getting closer to your exit of the planet, maybe you don't have as many huge career ambitions. Therefore, you can get back to that childhood sense of I'm just doing this for fun, first and foremost. And that doesn't mean that you might not monetize it, or even that you might become very successful, but you can remove some of that pressure and just play. And in the course of doing that, you might really be able to find a fresh creative voice that way. So those are just my observations on the phases of a creative life. Feel free to comment with your own observations of your own personal journey through the stages of life, especially if you're older than me and have more personal experience with the later ages that I don't have. Everyone is, of course, going to have their own experience based on so many factors of how each age hits you, but I'd love to hear it. If you're new here, my name is Lydia Foxglove, and I talk about the creative life in general and the writing life in particular. So if that sounds good to you, make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you'd like more from me, every week or so I have a free newsletter on Substack, and if you'd like 2 bonus videos from me every month, voted on by you guys, make sure to join my membership. I have a big old backlog of videos by now, and you can access that through Patreon, Substack, or YouTube memberships. And it helps support all the videos I do here on this channel. It also helps me to write my novels, which if you'd like to read any of those, there's a link in the description, and the Hidden Lands books are the ones that are the most me, the project I have to finish before I die. Thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel, and I will see you next time. Bye! You're so pretty.